Please find your seats. I would like to begin the festivities by making a toast. A l'chaim. A l'chaim to Leibel, that we should all see from him much nachas. May he be granted mazel and arichas yamim v'shanim tevis, long life and good years, healthy years. And may he lead us here and to his friends and to his family in the path of righteousness, in the path of Judaism, in the path of goodness. L'chaim, let us say Amen. Amen. I was asked graciously about 10 minutes ago to MC today. So I'll ask you all to please bear a few minutes as we are about to introduce the star of today. And though I stand here in Des Moines, Iowa, my heart and mind is still very much in a place of which we Jews try to forget. I'd like to share with all of you a short story that I witnessed and heard firsthand recently on a trip to Poland and Israel on what we call the March of the Living. I took with me 40 Jews from Montreal. My name is Rabbi Asher Jacobson. I'm the brother of Rabbi Yosef Jacobson, and I'm a rabbi of a synagogue in Montreal. And we recently went on a pilgrimage, a journey of what we call Mitzvah Chayim, March of the Living. I took with me 40 Jews from our synagogue, 5 of them Holocaust survivors. And I need you to imagine this, standing in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Think about this for a moment. And we had a survivor with us, clearly testified on his arm. We recited the Shema, as every Jewish boy recites when he puts on the tefillin. And then when we went into the crematorium, I asked one of the survivors who actually lived through Auschwitz to light a yahrzeit candle. I was surprised because this man, he brought with him his family and his grandchildren. He never spoke about the story. He never spoke about what took place. There he was standing in front of these ovens that we see only in pictures. We try to look away. And he lit a yahrzeit candle. And he began to recite the Kaddish. We were unshamefully, all of us, crying to watch this man recite the Kaddish. And then he turned to our group and he began to speak. I think he was talking to his family, particularly his children and grandchildren. And we too became part of his family on this trip. And I would like to share with you a first-hand story that I heard recently that's still very much in my mind. He said that when the Allied forces entered into the camp in Auschwitz, there were very few Jews left, very few redeemed. And he was lucky enough to be from those few. And he'll never forget the rabbi, the American rabbi chaplain that came into the camp, and he saw us all broken. Our souls were torn. We were so emaciated we could not even cast a shadow. And he was going tearfully from one survivor to the other survivor, trying to comfort, trying to breathe in and infuse some life. We were all so grateful for this rabbi who came to us, until he met up with one of the Jews who refused to speak to the rabbi. He was angry. And he said, I don't want to hear from rabbis. In fact, I don't want to hear from any religious people. They're despicable and I despise them. And the rabbi asked, may I ask, could you please tell me your story? What is it that you saw? And he said, sure, I'll tell you. From all that which I endured, I will never forget this religious man. This is a story that's printed and I read about it in text, but to hear it firsthand, it's a whole different dimension. I'll never forget this religious man that somehow was able to salvage a prayer book, a siddur. And when it came to Yom Kippur or a holiday or a special yahrzeit day, he would sell his siddur for an hour and he would sell it by taking bread. And whoever wanted to look into the Siddur and read some prayers, they would have to give him bread, their bread. And the rabbi asked, how many Jews would give up their only ration of the day to pray in this person's Siddur? And the man said, hundreds. Hundreds would stand on line and give away their only meal for the day to say the Kol Nidre, to say a blessing, to say a bracha. The rabbi gently said, maybe you should look at these Jews who would give up their sustenance just to say a prayer. I'm hearing this story from a man who saw this. He came from Krakow. His name is Sol, or he calls himself today Shmuel. He was 20 years old when he was in the barracks, Barrack 14. We went into Barrack 14. And he told us that he never had a bar mitzvah. At 20 years old, he was standing in Auschwitz. He came from a non-religious family. And the only private time that Jews had in this camp was in the actual barracks. There was no one standing on top of them, no one shooting at them, no one beating them. And he said to me that there was a Jew there that had tefillin, didn't sell it. And he would put on tefillin every day. There was a little lineup in the barrack and they would put on tefillin. And then somebody asked him in the group, did you have a bar mitzvah yet? And he said, no, he never had a bar mitzvah. And he adorned the royal emblem on his arm and on his head. Sol put on tefillin for the first time, 20 years old, and had his bar mitzvah in the barracks of Auschwitz. And suddenly there was a group of men that began to create a little hora, and they started dancing in jubilation. And he said to us, here we're standing and watching him in front of the oven, he said to us, at that moment, we went from marching to our death to marching in life. And this is what he said that rang in all of our hearts. He said to us, when he put on those pair of tefillin in the barracks with that joy, he found God in Auschwitz. He found God in Auschwitz. And I'll tell you something. If you could find God in Auschwitz, and he said because there was no humanity there. That's all he had was God. If we could find God in Auschwitz and give up our bread to say a prayer, how much more, think about this, in a free world, in Des Moines, Iowa, can we find God? In Chicago, in New York, in Montreal. If we honor these people in our history, then let us honor what makes us a people. To Leibel, I would like to say today, my nephew, myself, your father, your uncles, your grandfather who's sitting right beside you, I'll never want you to forget your great-grandfather, my grandfather, the father of the man who's sitting right here with you. His name was Jacobson, and he lived in Russia in a time of which to practice Judaism was a crime. To spread Judaism was a capital offense. Leibel, your grandfather was not intimidated, and he certainly was not ashamed. Not only did he practice Judaism and he held on to its fringes, but he went from city to city and he opened up mikvahs and synagogues and small Jewish educational centers and basements so that Jewish life should persevere, so that it should endure the persecution of the Soviet Union. Your great-grandfather made a promise to the Rebbe that he would give his life for Judaism. Yesterday, Art Kagan, a friend of Chabad of Iowa, succinctly and eloquently said, Leibel Jacobson in Des Moines, Iowa is a walking miracle. Imagine this past Shabbos, Leibel Jacobson leading the service, reading from the Torah, reading the Haftarah, holding the Torah close to his heart and walking around with it, Not only is he a walking miracle, but today we can say that he is fulfilling the promise that his great-grandfather made to the Rebbe in Russia. He is fulfilling the linkage. He and his father and his family here in Des Moines, dedicating their lives to Judaism and Yiddishkeit. And when we gather today, all of us, we're not just celebrating Leibel's bar mitzvah. That's a misconception. We're celebrating Judaism, all of us. Leibel's taking the bold step of continuing to put on the tefillin. But I ask all of us here today, whether you're religious, you're not religious, secular, whatever background you come from, we all today need to take a step. Make a commitment. That's the meaning of a bar mitzvah. Make Judaism part of your life. Make Judaism on your heart and in your mind. No. And make it something that you can say, I become part of. Make it something that you can say, I am breathing. I am living. Find God in Des Moines, Iowa. It's not that difficult if you think of this soul who found him in Auschwitz. 3,000 years ago, we made a promise, and God made a promise to us in the desert. Naseh v'nishma. We will do and we will adhere. The testimony of the Jewish people is right here in this room. We're not just miracle walkers, and we're not just a miracle. We are people that fulfill a promise of our great-great-grandfather Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses, and David, and Solomon. We link ourselves to that royalty, to that specialty. Leibel, you're fulfilling the promise, and your father is bringing Judaism to Des Moines and dedicating his life, and it's not easy. It's not like Montreal that there's a structured Jewish environment where there's hundreds of schools and kosher restaurants, and it's not like New York. And we all look up to this family here and their dedication. And I ask you all, put on a pair of tefillin. Come and celebrate Shabbos. Go to the Maccabee Deli and don't just order a kosher sandwich. Put on tefillin while you're there. Strengthen your family and yourself to Jewish life so that today's simcha is not just labels. Today's simcha becomes all of our simcha. It becomes our joy. Let us dance in jubilation. Because every time a boy stands up and says, I am a Jew at the age of 13, and I will read from the Torah, and I will put on the tefillin, it becomes a celebration of which we all join, because the story of the Jew continues in the next generation. Mazel tov. Let us all say Mazel tov, because this is a day of which we embrace who we are, because the world will never let us forget it. We embrace who we are as Jews. Am Yisrael Chai, may the nation of Israel live. Live in our hearts, but most important, live in our deeds. And let us say Amen. Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Ad Avinu Chai. You ready? Mazel tov, mazel tov, simin tov, simin tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simin tov. Yeah, tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simin tov, simin tov, mazel tov, mazel sing. Simin tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simin tov. Yehei lanu, yehei lanu, yehei lanu. Yisrael, Yehei lanu, oh lecha Yisrael, Yehei lanu. Yisrael.